Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Hey. We're on Samach Dalet Amud Aleph, and we are in Siman Taf Samach Beis. We're continuing Hilchos Pesach. We're on Taf Samach Beis, and we are beginning on Samach Dalet Amud Aleph with Seif Hey. Says the Mechaber, we're continuing to speak about somebody who makes a matzah dough with mei peiros, with liquids other than water. We're using what we call fruit juices, even though we've seen that this incorporates other beverages, not just fruit juices. It's also speaking about beverages such as oil. So the Mechaber says, Halosh isa b'mei peiros. If somebody needs a dough for Pesach using mei peiros. Now let's stop over there for a second, and let's take a look right away in the Mishnah Berurah on Ois Katan Chaf. B'mei peiros. Hainu, this means b'mei beitzim, with eggs, ushar mei peiros, or other mei peiros. But in the context of this halacha that we're going to learn now, says the Mishnah Berurah, this is referring specifically to dvarim she'enam mishiva mashkin, beverages that are not one of the 7 beverages shesimonam yod shachat dam, that are referenced by the mnemonic Yod Shachat Dam, Yud Dalid Shin Ches Tes Dalid Mem. Now, what are those? That mnemonic stands for, I'll tell you what it stands for, but I wanted to read you a footnote, but I neglected to open up my Dirsha Mishnah Berurah. But what it stands for is the Yud is Yayin, wine, the Dalid is Dvash, honey, the Shin is Shemen, oil, the Ches is Chalav, milk, the Tes is Tal, dew, the Dalid is Dam, the Mem of Yod Shachat Dam, the Mem is Mayim, so that's Yod Shachat Dam, Yayin, Dvash, Shemen, Chalav, Tal, Dam, and Mayim. Now if you take a look in the Dirshu, in footnote 23, they have a very nice little footnote here. It says over here, this mnemonic stands for Yayin, Dvash, Shemen, Chalav, Tal, Dam, and Mayim. When we make reference over here to dvash, when we speak about honey, we know that in the pasuk, when the pasuk mentions dvash, it doesn't mean what we typically call honey. It doesn't mean bees honey. It's referring to dvash tamarim. It's referring to the dvash, the honey that oozes out of dates. But in the context of this halacha, when we're talking about dvash, we're talking about what we commonly refer to as honey. We're talking about bees' honey. We're not talking about fruit honey. The shemen, and when we speak here about shemen, we're referring specifically hainu shemen zayis. We're referring specifically over here to olive oil, v'loy shar shmonim, not other oils. The chalav, and when we mention milk, it doesn't mean only milk. The chalav, kail gam mei chalav, it's also referring to mei chalav. Literally translated, mei chalav means the water of milk. Mei chalav is what we know as whey. It's when you separate milk, when you take the cream out of the milk and the fat out of the milk, so you're left with a byproduct, you're left with a watery byproduct. That's what we know as whey. That's mei chalav. So chalav over here, kail gam mei chalav, oichema shenimuach, shenimucha, or the cream that breaks down. So going back over here to what we're discussing, so the Mechaber says over here, Halosh isa b'mei peiros. If you needed a dough and you used a beverage, a liquid other than water, and other than these 7 liquids that we just mentioned, the Yad Shachat Dam, Toiv la'asoisa pachas mishir isarain. It is good and proper that you should knead that dough. You should make an amount of dough that's less than an isaron, less than an asiris ha'efa, which is the shear of challah. You should make over here a dough that is not chayiv in challah. Kedei shaloi tischayiv b'challah. We don't want you to make a dough that's chayiv in challah. Now, why not? What's the problem over here? So, to see it very succinctly, we'll see it expanded upon in the Mishnah Berurah. But if you take a look on the side of the page over here, in the upper left-hand corner, in the Be'er HaGolah, the Be'er HaGolah did a very, very sweet job of wrapping this up very concisely in a few words. Says the Berurah, Mipnei she'enoi mikabeles tuma. A dough that you needed with a beverage other than one of these 7 beverages is not mikabel tuma. It can't become tameh. Va'asar l'sarfa, and therefore you're forbidden to burn this challah. Va'asura l'tmeim, but you also can't give it to anybody because somebody who's tameh cannot eat it. What's at play over here? Very simple. When your wife goes ahead and bakes challah for Shabbos, she makes a sheer challah. That's why we call challah challah. There's an Indian for Shabbos. When we prepare our bread for Shabbos, we want to do a mitzvah with it. We make it a sheer challah so that we should be able to be mafresh challah from that dough. And that's indeed why we call the bread for Shabbos challah, because we make sure to be kind the mitzvah of afrashas challah with that challah. Now, what does she do with the challah? She takes the piece that she separates, she says harezu challah, and she burns it. Why does she burn it? Well, what else are we going to do with it? We can't give it to a kohen. A kohen can't eat it because it's tameh. It's challah tameya. Why is it tameh? It's tameh because all of us are tameh. The vast majority of us are tameh mace, and as well as other tumeis as well. So we're tameh, and we make the challah tameh. So the challah is tameh. Challah, that's tameh, you could burn. Now, there is a very basic rule in the halachas of tumas and tara. A food item cannot be makabel tuma. It cannot become tameh unless it is first hukshar lekabel tuma. Hukshar, it has to be prepared to be able to accept tuma, to be makabel tuma. How does something become prepared to accept tuma, to be makabel tuma? It has to become wet. Not only does it have to become wet, but it has to become wet with one of these 7 beverages that we just mentioned. It has to become wet from yayin, one of the beverages of yayin shachadam, either with yayin or with either with yayin, yad shachadam, either with yayin or dvash or shemen or chalav or tal. It has to become wet with one of these beverages. Now, if you need the dough not using one of those beverages, if you need the dough, let's say with apple juice, and I'm talking about real 100% apple juice, I'm not talking about apple juice from concentrate. Apple juice from concentrate would be reconstituted with water. So apple juice from concentrate is essentially water. But if you would need a dough with 100% pure, fresh, squeezed apple juice, so now you mix it in with the flour. This challah, assuming that you have no other liquid in there of the liquids that can be, of these 7 beverages that can be machshir something like kabel tuma. If you just mix flour and apple juice, so now this dough is not hukshir kabel tuma. It can't become tameh. Now, when you go ahead and you mafresh challah from that dough, what are you going to do with that challah? You can't burn it. It's challah tahara. It's challah that's tahar. Challah tahara, you're not allowed to burn. You're not allowed to burn kachim, that's tahar. And challah is kachim. So you can't burn it. So what are you going to do with it? You can't give it to a kohen. A kohen can't eat it because he can't eat it when he's tameh. So you can't give it to anybody and you can't burn it. What are you going to do with it? Therefore, says the mechaber, if you're going to make a dough with something like apple juice that is not going to be machshir the dough, l'kabel tuma, do not make a dough that's large enough to be chayiv and challah. Because if you do make a dough large enough to be chayiv and challah, you're going to create a problem. Now let's take a look at this in the Mishnah Berurah. So if we go back into the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Kat and Chaf, we read the first 2 lines of it. Now we go a couple of lines into Ois Kat and Chaf to the word Vahatam. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Vahatam, the reason for this halacha of the mechaber, where the mechaber says you should not make a dough that's the size of chiyav challah if you're using mei peiros, dal yedei mei peiros eina isa muksheres lekabel tuma. Because if you're going to use mei peiros, if you're going to use a beverage other than the 7 beverages that could be mashir something lekabel tuma, the dough will not be makabel tuma. V'nisheres hachallah tahara. So this challah that you're mafresh is actually going to be challah tahara. And now there'll be nothing that you can do with this challah. L'sarfa eina yachal. You can't burn it, which is what you typically do with challah. She'ein sarfin kachim tahirim, because we cannot burn kachim that's tar. Ula achla eina yachel, nor can we go ahead and give it to somebody to eat. Sharuban tamei mesimhein, because most people nowadays are tamei meis, so they can't eat it. Ubeshaya meis hashana, the rest of the year, if you're going to make a dough, I've seen babka recipes that call only for fruit juice. Now, again, I caution you, a lot of those recipes might have other liquids in them. For instance, I saw one recipe today that calls for honey. So if you're putting honey, so right away, honey is one of the beverages that is machshir a dough l'kabel tumah. But again, if you had something, a recipe that called only for apple juice, let's say, yesh eitzah, there still is an eitzah, there still is an idea of what you could do with the dough. When you mix it up, yeah, the recipe calls only for apple juice, but you'll pour in a little drop of water. And once you pour in even a minute amount of water, that dough is now going to be hukshar l'kabel tumah. That dough is now going to be makabel tumah, and now you'll be able to burn the challah that you mafresh from that dough. Like we see the halach in Hilchas Challah in Yeridei Shem Chav Tes. Avalata l'tzarech Pesach. But when you're making a dough for Pesach, when you're making a dough for matzah, you can't go ahead and add in a small amount of water. Haloyia mei peros imayim. Because what have we learned in the last several days? We've learned that if you make a dough for matzah, if you make it out of 100% fruit juice, then the shita of the mechaber, the opinion of the mechaber is that mei peros ein machmitzin. That mei peros, like apple juice, can't cause chimutz. But if you add even a minute amount of water, then we said not only can it cause chimutz, but it actually accelerates the combination of the fruit juice and the water accelerates the chimutz process. So if you're making the dough for matzah, you don't have the eitzah of adding in a drop of water so that it should be hukal l'kabel tumah. V'asalolush, you can't knead a dough for matzah that way, combining fruit juice and water. The chanal b'sif beis, like we saw previously in sif beis. Lochein, therefore, says the mechaber, ha'etzah, the proper thing to do over here is sheyolush pachas mikashir, that you should make this dough that you're making with mei peros less than a shir challah. That way you don't have this issue. And continues the Chavetz Chaim, ubediyeved im losh kashir. Let's say you forgot this and you went ahead and you needed a dough for matzah and you used apple juice and you didn't add any water, which you can't do. You can't add water. What do you do now? Yira litein achala l'kain katan. So the Chavetz Chaim says if you did this b'di'eved, you should be mafresh the challah and you should give it to a minor kain. You should give it to a kain katan shelo yotza tuma migufay, who never experienced a type of tuma, which is a tuma hayoytze migufay, a tuma that emanates from his body. You have a young child who is a kain. He never became a balkari. He never experienced a seminal emission. He's not a zav, so he never had a tuma hayoytze migufay kamavor b'yoredei sham. And if you take a look at the Dirshu in footnote number 24, he spells out over here in the footnote, the Sham Bir HaShulchan Aruch, over there in Hilchas Challah, the Shulchan Aruch says, Shemi sheyatza tuma migufay, somebody who experienced the type of tuma that's caused by something that emanates from his body, hainu balikarian, bezavim, bezavais, nidois, v'yoldais, a male who's a balkari or a zav, or a woman who's a zava or a nida, or a woman who experienced childbirth. So you could give it to a cotton who was never about carry, a katana shaliras a nida, or to a minor girl who was never a nida. Now this only works in chutz la'aretz, because chalas chutz la'aretz is only a din derabanan. This that we're mafresh challah from a dough in chutz la'aretz is a din derabanan. Midaraisa, there's no chiyuv of challah in chutz la'aretz. Aval chalas Eretz Yisrael, but in Eretz Yisrael, eino ne'achelas afilu l'tamei meis. In Eretz Yisrael, where challah is a din da'araisa, then you can't eat challah, even if you experience a tumah that's not a tumah hayoytze migufay, even a tumah like tumas meis, you can't eat challah. K'muvur b'shulchan aruch sham, the kasav v'derech emuna shetzarech l'koivra. What's the eitzah? Let's say you're in Eretz Yisrael, and so you have this challah that you can't burn because it's challah tahira. You can't give it to anybody to eat. So what do you do with it? So the Derech Hamuna says that you should bury it. I know that in the matzah bakeries here in Chutz La'aretz, the matzah bakeries that bake egg matzah. So egg matzah is a perfect example. Egg matzah, you have a matzah where you're using mei peros. We said mei beitzim is called mei peros. And egg is not one of the shiva mashkim that can be machshir something lekabel tuma. And in the matzah bakeries, they certainly produce an amount where it's going to have a chi of challah. So I'm told that the bakeries that do make egg matzahs and they have a share of afrashas challah, they separate challah and they put it up in the attic or they put it down in the basement and they wrap it up and they leave it there for years until it becomes moldy and eventually they can get rid of it. But that's because what else are you going to do? You can't burn it. Okay, now we move on to Siv Vav. Says the Mechaber, Chita, if you find a kernel of wheat, Chita, a kernel of wheat, shenimtzeis bedvash, that was found in honey. You took a look at honey, and in the honey you have a kernel of wheat floating in the honey. Oy biyayin, or if it was in wine, the chaimitz, or in vinegar, mutter, that the wine, the chaimitz, the vinegar, or the dvash, the honey, mutter, they're permissible. You're allowed to consume this dvash, this honey, or this wine, or this vinegar, as long as no water was mixed in to this honey, or to this wine, or to this vinegar. Says the Mishnah Berurah Chaf Aleph on Samach Daled Amud Aleph. Chita shenimtzeis, if you found a kernel of wheat in one of these food items. Umayri, says the Chavetz Chaim, we're talking about a case here, shebishlu hadvash v'hayayin, where you took the honey and you cooked the honey or the wine. Or a case where this wheat kernel that you found was soaking in the honey or the wine or the vinegar for a 24-hour period. Because if you found a wheat kernel floating in cold honey and it was only there for a short amount of time, less than 24 hours in cold honey, according to many poskim, even if you would find a wheat kernel floating in a jug of cold water and it was there for several hours, it was there less than 24 hours, it would be 100% mutter. You have to realize, what are we worried about here? What we're worried about here is we have a kernel of wheat that's floating in honey or it's floating in wine. Our concern is that this kernel of wheat may have become chametz, and it may have transferred the tam, the taste of the chametz, over to what it's floating in, over to the honey, over to the wine, over to the vinegar. Therefore, points out the Chavetz Chaim, what are we talking about here? If we're talking about cold honey, cold wine, cold chametz, and it was soaking in there for less than 24 hours, so there's no transference of time. So there's no possible chash, there's no possible problem. Therefore, it says the Chavetz Chaim, obviously the Mechaber is addressing a case where you cooked the wine or the vinegar or the honey together with this kernel of wheat that was in it, and now you're concerned that because of the cooking, there may have been a transference of time. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah weiter and as Chav Beis, mutter, this honey, this wine, this vinegar is permissible. Hadvash v'hayayin. V'lo yamrinan sheneschamtzu al yedei hachita. We do not say that because of the wheat kernel that was chametz, now the whole dvash, all the wine, is all chametz. I feel in this rakechav in this bakasham. This is true even if you look at the kernel of wheat and you say and you see that because it soaked, it became soft and it cracked. It swelled up and it cracked. Those are the simanim of chimutz in a wheat kernel. So you see that this wheat kernel, it looks like it was nischametz. She'ein mei peros machmitzim. This is not a problem because of the rule that we've been learning for the last several days. Mei peros do not cause chimutz. And therefore, even if you look at this kernel of wheat and it looks like it was nischametz, it looks like it puffed up and it cracked, it looks like a chametz stick of wheat kernel, it's not. It's sirchain ba'alma. It's some kind of spoilage, some kind of decomposition, but it is not fermentation. It's not chimutz. And therefore, everything is mutter. You take a look in the Dirshu, in footnote number 25, he brings down an interesting point. We seem to be understanding this halacha only in the context of the shita of the mechaber, the opinion of the mechaber. The opinion of the mechaber, well documented already over the last several days, is that mei peiros ein machmitzin, mei peiros don't cause chimutz, and therefore you could even knead a matzah dough using mei peiros. However, we saw in the Ramah earlier, in Sif Daled, we don't have minig Ashkenaz, according to the Ramah, we do not need a dough for Pesach using mei peiros, because we're afraid that either mei peiros maybe does cause chimutz, right? According to those shittas who disagree with the mechaber, or we're also worried that while mei peiros ein machmitzin, maybe these mei peiros, maybe this fruit juice actually had a small amount of water mixed into it. So how about in the context of this halacha that we're learning now? Let's say according to the Ramah, you find dvash, you find honey with a wheat kernel floating in it. So it's very nice that mei peiros ein machmitzin, but maybe according to our minig, we should worry that the honey actually had a small amount of water mixed into it, or the apple juice had a small amount of water mixed into it, and therefore the chita that you found, the kernel of wheat that you found, was nischametz. That's our minig. Our minig is we're afraid that the apple juice might have water in it. So if you're finding a kernel of grain floating in the apple juice, why don't we worry, according to our minig, that maybe there was water in the apple juice and maybe the kernel of grain that you found was nischametz, and since it was nischametz, the whole thing was nischametz. So it says here in the footnote, va'afilu lemin hagenu, even according to our minig, even according to what the Ramah said, sha'anu chayshish b'chol mei peiros shem hisarvu be'emayim, that we're chayshish that mei peiros might have water mixed into it and therefore it is nischametz. U'kamosh kasav la'el sif katan tezvav. Kasav Shulchan Aruch Harav. If you look at the Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Shulchan Aruch Harav says, he makes a very interesting chilik between these two halachas. He says, while it's true that we're chayshish, we are concerned that maybe mei peiros had a small, minute amount of water mixed into it, and therefore it does cause chimutz. That doesn't apply to this halacha when you find a kernel of grain floating in the mei peiros. Kevan shachash shaloi lolosh isa b'mei peiros v'shaloi lasos b'yam tavshel and kemach einay elo lechatchila. Since really this is a chumrah and it's only lechatchila. Lechatchila we say don't make a dough with apple juice because maybe the apple juice had a small amount of water in it. So avo b'di'eved. But in the case of b'di'eved, where we didn't go initially to make the dough, ein lesar machmas chash is that. We're machmir even in case of b'di'eved. If you made a dough and you already have a dough that you needed mei peiros, we're also machmir. But that's b'shum she'im natir loichlam b'pesach. The reason we're machmir b'di'eved is because we say if we allow you to eat a matzah that you needed with mei peiros, even though you only did it b'di'eved, we're matir b'di'eved, what's going to happen? Shema pamacheres yasekei lechatchila. A year later, you're going to say, last year I ate egg matzah, but so this year I'll also eat egg matzah. I'll make egg matzah lechatchila. But the reason you did it last year is because it was b'di'eved. Now you want to do it lechatchila, we're not going to let. So because we don't want you to end up doing it lechatchila, we're makber even b'di'eved. But in the context of the halacha that we're learning today, where you didn't go ahead and put a chita in the honey, you opened up a jar of honey and you found a wheat kernel in it. So you didn't do it at all. You didn't do it. It did not that you did it and it's b'di'eved, not that you did it l'chatchila. You didn't do it at all. You found it. You have a kernel of wheat that fell into mei peiros. Ein lahachmir b'di'eved. There's no reason over here to be machmir b'di'eved. Okay, so that's why the Mishnah Berurah over here doesn't make mention of our minig. We're learning here a halacha that is totally dependent on the halacha of whether or not mei peiros are machmitz. The Shulchan Aruch shita is that mei peiros are not machmitz, but we go with the Ramah that mei peiros are machmitz. Why doesn't the Mishnah Berurah say, oh, this is only true according to the Mechaber? Because it's true according to the Ramah also. We're not machmir to this extent. Okay. So therefore, said the Mishnah Berurah here, nice Beis, mutter advash v'ayayin, the dvash, the honey and the wine, where you found the wheat kernel floating in it, their mutter. We don't say that it became chametz by virtue of the chametz stick of wheat kernel. Even if the wheat kernel shows obvious signs of chimutz, she'ein mei peros machmitzin, because in the context of this halacha, we're samech on the Shulchan Aruch, who holds that mei peros are not machmitzin, and we're not machmir more than that. Now we turn the page, we go to Samach Daled on the Beis, and take a look at the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Chav Gimel. Very long Mishnah Berurah over here. But it's good because if we get through this Mishnah Berurah, we pick up a day on the Dirshu schedule because it's most of Samach Daled on the Beis. So the Mechaber ended off Siv Vav by saying the honey, the wine, the vinegar is mutter even though you found this wheat kernel in it. Ubelvad shalonis arev bahem mayim. So long as water was not introduced into the honey, into the vinegar, into the wine. Because the whole reason we're being materid over here is because we're saying mei peros ein machmitzin. But if water was introduced, now you have mei peros together with water, which we said is even worse, because it could be that the chimus process is actually accelerated. So now we would say you found a wheat kernel in a combination of mei peros and mayim. Now you have a real bona fide problem. So therefore, says the Mechaber, this halacha is only, it's dependent on ubelvatchel in the sarv ben mayim, so long as water was not mixed in together with these mei peros. Says the Mishnah Berurah nice Katan Chav Gimel, ubelvatchel in the sarv ben mayim, de'im nisarev, because if water was introduced into this mixture, adarabba, then quite the opposite, it's even worse. Machmitzin tvei. Now we have to worry that the chimus process is actually accelerated. The chanal b'siv beis, like we saw previously in siv beis. V'had the mavur le'el b'siv gimel. Chavetz Chaim picked up on something very interesting over here. I didn't catch this immediately, but Chavetz Chaim did. Says the Chavetz Chaim, v'had the mavur le'el b'siv gimel. This that we said yesterday, we learned it in siv gimel. The mutter lalish b'yayin. You're allowed to knead a matzah dough using wine, even though wine always has water mixed into it. And we explained yesterday that they always mixed water into the wine so that they shouldn't have a yayin nesach problem when they were pouring water from their barrels into the jugs of non-Jews, because by virtue of adding a little bit of water, if you added enough water to be mavatal, whatever yayin nesach was remaining in the jug of the non-Jew, so then the yayin nesach problem is taken care of. So he said that the wine always has water mixed into it, and yet the halacha is you could knead a matzah dough using wine. And we explained yesterday, why isn't that a problem? It should be a problem of mei peros together with water, and that should accelerate the chimus problem. And we explained yesterday that the reason is because since we're talking about a case where the water was added within the first 3 days after the pressing of the wine, and therefore the water was already in together with the wine when the wine fermented, and because the water was there during the fermentation process, the water is transformed into wine. So it's no longer considered a mixture of mei peros and mayim. It's considered 100% wine, 100% mei peros. So now the Chavetz Chaim is wondering, I don't understand. So why don't we say the same thing over here? Over here, we're saying that if you found the wheat kernel in the wine, it's okay because mei peros ein machmitzin ubelvad shelo nisar b'mayim, as long as water wasn't mixed in. Chavetz Chaim is bothered. What do you mean? Even if water is mixed in with the wine, we said yesterday water, wine, not a problem. Explains the Chavetz Chaim that was in yesterday's halacha, not today's. Shani hasam. What we learned yesterday was different. Shenaf la mayim kaidim tesisa sayayin, because we were discussing yesterday a case specifically where the water was introduced to the wine before the wine fermented. Ubetesisas hayayin, and through the fermentation of the wine, nishapku hamayim lihiyos yayin. The water was transformed into wine, and it is no longer considered a mixture. It's considered 100% mei peros. But that's not true if the water was introduced into the wine after it was fully fermented. So I'll stop over here for a second. Let's pause over here for a second. Over here in this halacha, when the Mechaber says that the wheat kernel found in the wine is mutter, so long as water wasn't introduced, what he means is so long as water was not introduced into the wine after the fermentation of the wine. If water was introduced after the fermentation of the wine, then you have a problem, because then it is a mixture of mei peros and wine. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. V'chita shedimtzeis b'mei dvash shekorin mead. If you found a wheat kernel in honey water, which is mead, that's a preparation, a fermented preparation. It's kind of like a beer that's made out of honey, no barley involved. Oy b'yayin saraf hanasin mi peros. Or you found a kernel of wheat in a liqueur that was made out of fruit. So you have your shlivovitz for Pesach, which is a plum liqueur, and you found, so it's kosher Pesach, and you found in your plum liqueur, you found a kernel of grain, a kernel of wheat. Or you have date beer, which is also kosher Pesach. If it's 100% pure date beer, it has nothing to do with barley, so it's also kosher Pesach, but you found over here a kernel of wheat floating in your date beer. Uperos, or it's made out of other fruits. And you know that no water was added to this honey mead or to this liqueur or to this date beer after it was manufactured, after it was produced. So you went ahead and you made a date beer. And of course, water was added to the date beer initially. How do you think you make date beer? Date beer is essentially mostly water. It's water that takes on the flavor of the fermented fruit, but it's essentially mostly the liquid is water. So certainly it started off with water in it, but over here we're talking about a case where you fermented your honey mead, you fermented your slivovitz, and you know that after the fermentation process was complete, no water was added. That's the case that the Chavetz Chaim is addressing. Im oiser oiloi. So you have your fully fermented date beer, your fully fermented honey mead, and now you found a kernel of wheat in it. Is that osir or not? What's the question? So the Chavetz Chaim explains. Nistapku ha'achronim. The achronim are mesopik. The achronim are in doubt. Im yesh l'damoisan l'yayin shel tzimukim. Should we look at this like raisin wine, which we discussed yesterday? We said yesterday by raisin wine that just like by regular grape wine, we say that any water that was introduced into the wine before the fermentation process is transformed into wine through the fermentation process. Do we say the same thing here? Do we say over here by this honey mead or by this date beer? Do we say that the original water that was used to produce these beverages, they were transformed? So the water was transformed from water into honey mead or into date beer, and therefore it's called mei peros. And now if you find a kernel of wheat floating in it, it's considered a kernel of wheat that's floating in 100% mei peros. So here by the honey mead or by the liqueur, we also say that through the cooking process, when you produce these beverages, and the fermentation of the honey or the dates, the water is transformed into mei peros, and there and all these other beverages, and therefore if you find a wheat kernel, it's now considered a wheat kernel in mei peros, which are not machmitz, or perhaps no. Maybe shani anovim, maybe grape wine is different and raisin wine is different, which is produced ultimately from grapes, they're dried grapes. Shekoicham chazak, because those are very strong. They have a very powerful flavor. lahape chamayim liyayin. And in those cases, that water is considered transformed into wine. But in this case, of the date beer or the honey mead, maybe not. The V'chein b'dvash tzimukim hanal. And also by the honey that you make from dried fruits. When you make a honey out of, let's say, dried dates, dried raisins, also you cook it and you let it sit, and it actually becomes thick. It becomes thickened. So too over there, we understand that it becomes, the mayim becomes transformed to something else that is considered meperos. Masha ain't kain b'cholelu, but maybe contrast that to the case under discussion here by date beer or honey mead. These are very much liquids, and maybe even after the cooking process and the fermentation process, these are still essentially water. So the Achronim are mesupik about this. Okay, and therefore yesh lahachmir, we should rule stringently that if a kernel of grain, if a kernel of wheat fell into these beverages, we should not drink them. But you can hold on to them until after Pesach. There would be no shaila of chametz sha'avar lava Pesach. Or you could get hana from them. You could sell them to a non-Jew. Yesh lahakol. Over there, you could be lenient. Interesting, by the way, you have a little bit the same question amongst the Paiskim. We know that it comes up sometimes if you don't have wine or grape juice and you want to make havdalah. So we say that you could use chamar medina. You could use something that's considered a chashav, a beverage in the medina that you are. So the question comes up, how about coffee? And I know that there are Paiskim that say instant coffee, what is it? It's water. It's what it is. It's water. You take a teaspoon of this instant stuff and you stir it in, but essentially you have a mug full of water over here. That's chamar medina. Water is chamar medina. So they have a question of whether or not you could really use this, whether you consider it chamar medina. So too over here, what the Achrayim are saying is, by the honey mead and by the date beer and by the liqueurs, essentially it's water. It's flavored water. So the question is, again, do we look at it the way we look at wine? By wine, we say it's not water. If you had water that was added in, and it was added in before the fermentation, once you ferment it and you make it Cabernet, it's not considered Cabernet mixed with water. It's 100% Cabernet. Over here, is that what we say? Do we say that it's no longer water, it's slivovitz? Or do we say no, essentially it's flavored water? Continues the Chavetz Chaim. Okay. However, im yodua shahachita lo yahaya me'es la'es pamayim, if you know for a fact that this kernel of wheat was not there in the liquid for a 24-hour period, then you don't have to worry about it. You can even drink it. Because you're talking about a cold beverage, there's no transference of tam from this wheat kernel into the rest of the beverage. Similarly, if you look at the kernel of grain that you found floating over here in the honey, and you see that it did not split, levad, it only swelled up a little bit and softened, but it doesn't truly have the siman of chimutz. Yesh lahakol, you could rule leniently, even if you're not aware how long it was there. Unless you know for sure that this kernel of wheat was in there for a 24-hour period, in which case we say kavush areu kumavushal. If it's soaked for that long, it's akin to as if it would have been cooked in there, and there is a transference of tam. Okay, now the Chavetz Chaim goes on to a new topic, so we're going to stop over here for today. Mr. Hashem will continue tomorrow from over here at this point in the Mishnah Berurah. Thank you so much for joining me, Al. It's a pleasure to see you. And thank you so much for joining me for this Torah learning discuss of Limud Torah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. Anybody who needs Yeshuas and Refuas, Rabban Shalom should dish them out heartily. Everybody should get Refuah. Everybody should have Yeshuas. You know, I think that once we're Mispal, I know that the Rav Moshe used to say that if somebody needs something, if somebody has to make a large purchase, let's say somebody has to do some work on his house, and he's making a simcha, he's making a chassan. So the Rishon Zal used to say, when you have other expenses not typical expenses, try to throw them in, try to include them at a time when you're spending money on a simcha. Why? Because he said that when the Rebbeinu Shalom, somebody makes a simcha, the Rebbeinu Shalom gives him extra bracha. The Rebbeinu Shalom knows you need extra parnasa now. You need a bonus. You have to make a chasana. Even though I sincerely hope that learning the lesson of these last several weeks, where chasanas have been made in driveways with very small crowds. My son in Cleveland just had a chasana in his backyard with a very, very small crowd. So now seeing that we can make chasanas in backyards, and we can make chasanas in driveways, and we can make chasanas without 5-piece bands, and we can make chasanas without flowers, and we can make chasanas without elaborate shmorgs, and we can make chasanas without elaborate Viennese tables, and we can make chasanas without hundreds of people attending. I sincerely hope that, having learned that lesson the hard way, I hope it'll stick. And I hope that chasanas will cease to be $30, $40, $50, $60, $70, $80,000 affairs, and people will come to their senses and go back to the way it was years and years ago, where people made simple chasanas. There's no reason why we have to make these elaborate events. And if Klal Yisrael will learn that lesson, then just imagine the stress that will save people. So I sincerely hope that that lesson will be learned. But be that as it may, still, the Rishon Zatzal used to say that when you're making a simcha, the Rebbeinu Shalom sends some extra bracha. So you have other expenses, you've been hobbling around in your car with a bum transmission because you couldn't spend the money on the transmission. Now you're making a chasana, so you'll squeeze it in on the list. $1,000, $1,200, $1,500 for the transmission. Because once the Rebbeinu Shalom is sending bracha, he can send a lot of bracha. He doesn't have to limit it to a little bit of bracha. So we have to be mispal over here for people who need refuah. And once we're mispal for people who need refuah and people who need parnassas, a lot of people who are hurting terribly from a parnassa angle. So we mispal that the Rebbeinu Shalom should give everybody refuahs. The Rebbeinu Shalom should give everybody parnassa. And the Rebbeinu Shalom should also shik any other yeshuas that people need. And like I keep on saying, we shouldn't lose sight of the ultimate prize. We're being mispal to the Rebbeinu Shalom for refuahs and yeshuas. We should be mispal to the Rebbeinu Shalom for the Geula Shlema. We should be mispal to the Rebbeinu Shalom that we should be zeicha to come to the Beis HaMikdash. And we should be zeicha not only to be Oved Hashem in a minyan and say Amen Yehesh Pnei Rabba. We should be Oved the Rebbeinu Shalom in the Azara. We should be zeicha to hear the Shem HaMafurish Yotze Mipi Kohen Gadol. And we should be able to answer Baruch Shem Kvod Malchut Le'olam Vayed. That's what we want. We want the whole deal. We don't want a consolation prize. We want the full thing. So let's remember what it is that we should be mispal for. Rosh Hashanah should sick Yeshua and Refuahs. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Be well.
Is this in record? Is this in advance?
How do you turn it off?
That
How do you turn